Good afternoon, Rory. Thanks very much for joining today and thank you for taking part in the Business Spotlight series. I'm going to hand it straight across to you to introduce yourself and what you do.
Sure. Rory Proud. I've been working in the maritime intelligence space now for just over a decade. Recently started Maritime Data with my co-founder, James Littlejohn. Maritime Data is ostensibly a digital brokerage for data and analytics, but serving exclusively the maritime ecosystem.
Fantastic. So tell me a bit more about that. What does that actually involve and who are your clients?
I guess the three things that we try and help people do is to source, evaluate, and purchase data and analytics. Now, I guess the genesis of the idea was James and I both worked at one of the largest suppliers in the space for collectively 16 years or so. My last held position, was the head of US sales based out of New York, and James was the head of the key accounts team. And in the last 5 years, maybe with the kind of advent of machine learning and AI, we just saw an explosion of new data and analytics companies all trying to address particular problems or similar problems in a different way, which is fantastic. But from a customer point of view, the buying group still remained the same. There wasn't additional staff to try and take that into consideration. So the process of kind of sourcing the most appropriate solution for their needs or evaluating one versus the other, be it their incumbent or another new system on the market, and then eventually making a purchase, was growing in difficulty. So I think what we saw, and probably all of the suppliers saw, and maybe kind of influenced by COVID to a certain extent, was that retention rates were always solid for these solutions, which in part was definitely to do with the quality of the product and product market fit, customer service, etc. But we thought that in part it was down to kind of the time and effort that it took to really try and assess every available option. So we thought, well, there's almost certainly got to be a solution to this problem. We actually explored a series of different alternative distribution channels who were trying to address this problem while we were at the old place. And we all thought that they kind of had the right idea, but maybe not the correct approach for the maritime markets. So we thought, well, why don't we put a new idea with an old operating system in the form of brokers, obviously brokers being synonymous with shipping, and set up a business to try and solve exactly that. And so far, so good.
Excellent. And so tell me a bit more about what is it, the new idea? What's the sort of the new slant or new way that you do things?
So the businesses that we are aware of that were trying to do this beforehand were taking more of a kind of marketplace style model, like Amazon Data Exchange, for example. Bloomberg have got some sort of enterprise terminal, and there's a series of other businesses who basically try and warehouse data products and offerings and then make them available via APIs. And so a customer can come on in theory and then select all of data in a particular category, read a description, press go, press pay, and then get an API straight into the business, which to a certain extent, right, I think works. It cuts down a lot of time, but it doesn't necessarily satisfy all of the requirements of the buying process, where on the buyer side, in our experience anyway, not only do you want to know kind of like the technical description of the products, but you want to see the team behind the solution. Inevitably, these things go wrong, right? Be it delivery mechanisms or be it discrepancies in the data, quality, quantity, whatever that may be. And I think in large, certainly from our experience of doing this now for almost a year, buyers want to understand whether they can trust the team delivering the solution. So in the event these things go wrong, who are they speaking to on the other end of the phone? Who's on the other end of that email? And that's a big differentiating factor behind what sometimes can be kind of commoditized product sets. So we didn't think that you should remove the supplier out of the process entirely, to just kind of make it into zeros and ones that you can review in description boxes on an email style solution. So what we do really is we understand exactly what the buyer wants. Obviously, we've got a degree of kind of domain experience where we're familiar with use cases and kind of how it is that other organizations and personas of a similar description might approach the same problem, or how they've done it in the past and to what effect. So we can support them to form their requirement there, almost taking a kind of consultative approach. We then narrow down in our database who the most appropriate suppliers are for their requirement to go to. We can send that requirement. either anonymously or with their name, depending on what they prefer. The majority of buyers end up going anonymously, and what that ends up being is that we get more senior people in the lead funnel, because as opposed to sending an email into 10 different organizations and being inundated with kind of sales and marketing emails as you would, they can do it kind of vicariously through us, which is good. The suppliers will then have the opportunity to accept that, which is an important distinction, right? Because of course there are, well, maybe I'll go on to how we monetize our efforts later on, but sometimes they feel that they might already be working on a similar opportunity, or that's not fit for their business, and they have the opportunity to reject. Then so let's say they accept the requirement, they'll accept it, provide some kind of high level information to say, this is how we might address your requirements, and this is how our solution might support. And then our effort is to whittle down that list to the most appropriate selection of suppliers for the buyers, and then connect them on a platform to then hash out the details, kind of removing us from the process almost entirely. Now, we do that via the medium of a software platform, which just makes it kind of easier to communicate. But ultimately, it's the prerogative of the buyer and supplier as to kind of how they take it from there. And we'll only intervene if necessary. But we really wanted to keep kind of the supplier in the mix, and connect the buyer with the teams behind the products.
Fantastic. And in terms of the plans for the next 5 years for the company, where would you like to take it?
Well, in the business plan, we've got two different directions that we think that we might take, and these things seemingly change on a month-by-month basis, right? So I might look back at this in 3 months' time and say, what was I talking about? But plan number one is called the Moguls of Maritime, which is just a ridiculous way of saying that we stay focused entirely within our industry and exclusively dedicate this business to serving the maritime ecosystem, which at the minute I really enjoy. Like I've worked in this industry for a decade. I don't think I grew up as a young boy or like during college thinking that this was the industry I wanted to land in. I just kind of fell into it. But I think when you realize the impact that maritime has on the global economy, and even down to things now like inflation, and when your stuff's turning up at your door, as was put on the map in 2021 with the supply chain crisis that we all lived through. It's just incredibly interesting, and I've got a bit of a kind of side passion for macroeconomics and geopolitics, of which shipping's kind of heavily involved in. So that's plan number one. And then just build out our offerings around kind of one community and one audience. I say one audience, right? It's an incredibly diverse industry with multiple different participants, from brokers, owners, port logistics to insurance, finance, energy and trading. The second plan is to expand more broadly into trade. So maritime being an integral part of world trade, I think it's in between kind of 80 to 90% of all trade is moved via ships at some point in their life cycle. So that naturally extends into the hinterland, into land beyond the port, trucking, etc., aviation, and I guess anything else that just supports people's view on world or regionalized trade. So there are two different directions that we could take. But ultimately, in terms of what we want to achieve, we just want to have an impact. I think the mission statement is just to make the process of buying data easier, because I think there are still unnecessary complications in this. And I really do think that with the launch of kind of like accessible AI at the end of 2022, we could see an exponential growth in the number of what we call like micro companies, like sub 10-person organizations, who can leverage the kind of computational power of these systems. And what feeds AI and machine learning is data. Kind of good input creates good output a lot of the time. And I think more and more the value of good input is going to determine good output, as a lot of people begin to use similar models and similar approaches. And unless you have kind of different meat coming into the sausage machine, you're going to converge on a similar answer. So I think if you have an explosion of small new companies all wanting to buy data at the same time, you really could see like a data super cycle. So if we can try and make it as easy as possible for people to understand, let's say if we stick in maritime, kind of what maritime data is, how it can be used, and how to access it, then I think we've done a good job.
Cool. Yeah. So a number of different areas that you can grow it in, basically, and so I can hear that the detail and a level of knowledge required to do that. And on the other side of it, then, what are the challenges for your industry?
I think a lot of people would look at maritime, and they might be right in certain pockets of the industry and say that it was more traditional, let's say, than other industries. Obviously, we're a business that facilitates the sale, purchase, and adoption of data and analytics. And for an industry that's been around as long as time, a lot of the approaches of organizations aren't necessarily the same as the kind of cutting edge companies of San Francisco, right? To make an extreme comparison. So I'd say that could be a challenge, but then honestly, that's changing at a rate of knots, I think, spurred on by some of the pressures that shipping face. They've got some pretty aggressive environmental regulations that we need to hit by 2050, similar to other industries, and perhaps we as an industry started slightly behind others in terms of the work that's needed to be done to hit those net zero targets, amongst kind of like the standard commercial pressures to become more efficient and more effective. So we're seeing the adoption curve really kind of change in terms of how people use these solutions. So I think that was a challenge, but less so these days. I'd say the second challenge really being that because of its traditional roots in shipping, it really is a kind of network-driven industry. And I know the majority of industries probably say the same thing, but like you really do have to be in the right rooms and know the right people in order to have conversations with some of the kind of larger and more influential organizations in the space. So that's always a challenge, right? To kind of have the appropriate network. And the approach, I guess, that we're taking is just try and create as much value as we possibly can for people, and then hopefully in time your kind of network expands in the right direction. The whole do the right thing, get the right results mantra.
Yeah, makes sense. And again, you strike me as somebody who is sort of possibly deeply reflective and thinks about things a lot and analyzes things, given the sort of nature of what you do. What would you say has been your biggest learning as a business owner?
Probably time and focus. Time in the sense that, so I guess time and focus are the same point. You have a set amount of time in a day, right? And I know you can read all of the Silicon Valley business books and they'll tell you that they work 26 hours a day, and you can do that, but you'll burn out, right? So you've got to try and get that balance right. And then what you spend your time doing. I think personally for me, like probably a bit of a self-proclaimed ideas guy, that I love kind of spinning up new ideas and testing them out and see what works. And you can do that at a big company to a certain extent, especially if you've got teams of people kind of working for you or around you, where you can come up with an idea in a room, have someone else go test it out, track the results over a period of time and see what works, right? The whole kind of like place a series of small bets and then look at the data, listen to the feedback, and then commit to the ideas that work best. At the minute, we're a two-person company, so there's only so much time to do that. So we really do have to commit to the things that we think are going to work and dial in with laser focus. I think it's the Bruce Lee quote. This is cheesy as anything, but it's like the most savage warrior is the savage man with laser-like focus, and I think that's true. So James and I really do try and commit to, I think it's 3 things we've got in any given quarter that we try and do. We set kind of some arbitrary targets, but in reality, it's more about the input and the amount of time and effort that we spend focusing on those 3 things. So far, that's served as well, but we can always do a better job in that respect. But I think it really is kind of focusing and doubling down on the things that you think are going to be the key drivers to pushing you in the direction you need to go.
Fantastic. Yeah, fully agree with that and the importance of planning, but equally, yeah, being only able to do so many things at once, only so many hours in the day. So prioritizing and finding what the most important things is important. And I could hear a bit there's a test and measuring there as well. So
Yeah, definitely. I'd like everyone I imagine before they start a business has read books like The Lean Startup and various others, and you try and incorporate kind of ideas from these things into what you do. And we still do to a certain extent, right? But I think you mentioned planning there, like planning definitely is important. We've got a kind of general idea of where we want the business to go over the next 6, 12, 24 months. But I think doing is exponentially more important, and just like almost kind of in 3-month chunks is the way that we're approaching it. Pick 2 or 3 things to do and then do them as well as we possibly can.
Brilliant. Fantastic. And look, as a final thing, is there any sort of news or any offer you would like to extend to the audience?
Well, we just spun up a newsletter that comes out every 2 weeks. It's the Maritime Data newsletter, free to subscribe, free to read. And it concentrates on publishing the kind of latest developments and updates in the maritime data and analytics space, as well as kind of insights driven from a maritime data point of view.
Brilliant. Well, let's put a link to that in the description below, and people can go down below and sign up below to get that data, and hopefully it can help grow that too.
Sounds good.
Brilliant. Look, thanks very much, Rory. It's been great to find out what you do. It's a bit different to some other business we speak to in the West End of London, and I look forward to seeing where the business plan goes, whether you become the moguls of maritime or whether it's in direction.
Let's hope so. Thanks a lot for having me on it. Cheers.
Thanks.